Many things come out past midnight, various animals and humans alike. What I'm referring to specifically though are things that should not exist. Terrifying creatures beyond the comprehension of the most wicked of imaginations. Have you ever been out past midnight? If so, surely you have felt that odd feeling as if you're being watched when you're alone. When you are alone is when you're most vulnerable to them. You see, they don't like to hunt groups of people. It's much easier when their victims are isolated. This is why you probably won't see anything odd when you're out with friends this late. And why would I know this, you ask? Well, I had my own experience many years ago. This experience shook me to the core. What happened, it made me reevaluate everything I thought of our reality. It made me believe myself to be mentally unsound. My Thanksgiving break had just started, and my plans were to spend the first few days at my friend Tyler's house. This was all back in high school, so I had no means of transportation besides my parents. Originally, they were supposed to take me over there, but they decided to take a little surprise vacation of their own. I got a text midway through the day from my mom saying that she was unable to give me a ride, and since my dad was going off with her, he couldn't either. This left me with two options. I either walk to Tyler's or I simply just don't go. Initially, I went with the latter. Me and Tyler played Xbox for a few hours. I was a pretty lazy kid, cursing and killing each other in both private and online matches in Call of Duty. Before I knew it, the clock had already struck around 11 p.m. I made mention of this to Tyler, saying that I would probably get off and do some of the homework I was assigned over break. But Tyler then threw some insults at me, saying that I was a wuss and that I should walk over. Typical shit talking between two 15-year-old boys. Somehow, Tyler eventually convinced me to just say screw it and walk over. It was a 2.5-mile walk, so I figured that I would be done in roughly an hour. I packed up all my stuff and I told Tyler that I was on my way. It was about 11:30 when I left. I should have never said yes to coming. Just thinking about how I could explain these events is giving me feelings of dread. A little information at first. I lived in a very poorly lit area. It was a small city called Norco, pretty much the literal ass crack of California. Most of the lights were in the inner city, and at the time I lived in the outskirts. The light posts in my area were few and far between, and a lot of the land I had to traverse before making it to Tyler's was barren. It was the type of empty space that would give anybody walking on it at late night an eerie feeling. And just to add to this, despite the lack of light, I thought that I was brave enough to go without a flashlight. I was a very naive kid, as you can tell. The first 20 minutes went by without any issue. And this was about the time it took me to get out of the populated area. Once I hit the more desolate area, I could tell that something was off. I swore that literally a minute ago, I could hear all the sounds of the night. Crickets chirping, wind blowing, all of that. However, it had come to an abrupt stop. This gave me a very unsettling feeling, so I checked the time to see how long it had been since I had left my house. It was 12 o'clock on the dot. This meant that I had about 20 or 30 minutes left to walk and to do before I was at Tyler's. The distance wasn't an issue for me, but the unnerving silence was. All I could hear at that point were my footsteps and my breathing. I had never been in such a quiet setting before. It was almost as if the world froze around me. I kept walking for what felt like hours and I decided to check my watch. It was 12. How? With the distance that I thought I had covered, it couldn't be the same exact time as it was when I initially checked. As I was in the midst of trying to figure out if my watch was broken, I heard a noise in the shrubbery to my right. This caused me to jump due to the prolonged silence that I had gotten used to. I was no longer the only one breathing. I heard a long, labored breath, something that sounded like it was coming from a dying animal. Now, I wasn't a veterinarian, and it was midnight at this point. I wasn't going to go home and check out where the noise came from. Horror movies had at least taught me some common sense. I quickly moved from the sidewalk on which I was walking on, moving towards the center of the street instead. The creature that I had heard from the shrubbery moved as well. It came out of the area in which it was hiding. All of my red flags had been raised. I was about ready to haul ass out of there. At this point, I was looking directly at it. When it stepped into the dimly lit area, I could barely make out any features. You remember how I said the light posts were few and far between? Well, I was at the point of my journey in which the streets were still scarcely lit, and details were somewhat visible. The first thing that I noticed was the extremely elongated shadow that this thing casted on the ground. The creature must have been at least 8 feet tall. It looked human in overall appearance. Since it was standing with its back to the most recent lamppost, its face was too dark to make out specific features. Even with this as a factor, I could see that it was smiling. It wore a tattered up trench coat which went down to its waist, an unkempt vest, what seemed like shredded up dress pants, and torn up shoes. All of the clothing it had on was clearly too small for it. In the brief few seconds that I was staring back at this thing, a few events transpired. These events have haunted me well into my adult years. At first, I noticed that its head was slowly tilting to the side, all the while maintaining that same damn crooked smile. That same smile that makes my blood run cold whenever I think about it. For those asking why I didn't just book it at this point, try putting yourself in my shoes. I was a 15-year-old kid who had never experienced true fear at any point in his life. I truly didn't know what to do. I was frozen. What happened next is kind of a blur. I recall hearing a horrifying mix of bones breaking, as well as a blood-curdling, inhuman scream. I saw the creature get on all fours, positioning its arms and legs at impossible angles. It then started galloping towards me. The damn thing was charging me. It took me a minute to react to what was occurring. I finally hauled ass, something that I should have done from the start. I glanced behind me to check the distance that I had made from it, but it was moving at an extremely alarming pace. This was a pace faster than I had seen most animals on all fours run. It was catching up, and quickly. I brainstormed and I had the bright idea of tossing my duffel bag, full of Xbox equipment, clothes, and toiletries directly at the creature. It had seemingly hit it in the head, buying me a decent amount of space from it. I kept sprinting until I saw a car's headlights turn the corner for the street that I was on. I waved frantically, screaming as loud as I could for help. I heard the creature's bones making a sick, meaty noise while smacking the pavement. It was right behind me at this point. as I could feel its labored breathing on the hair in the back of my neck. My screams got louder and my waving more frantic. Until silence. The car was around 100 feet from me at this point. The creature had seemingly just disappeared altogether, or it had run back off into the shrubbery. I didn't care. I was alive, and that was all that I was concerned about. I was crying, out of breath, and frankly, a complete mess. But who wouldn't be? The driver, clearly seeing my current physical state, pulled up next to me and asked if everything was alright and if there was anything that he could do to help me. I was a big blubbering mess and I couldn't even form a complete sentence when responding to him. I thanked him profusely for coming when he did, but he didn't clearly understand why I was so thankful. I don't blame him. Would you? The events that I just wrote down here were truly bizarre, and I probably seemed like a madman to you. I asked if he would drive me home as I was just a few minutes drive away, and he obliged. I almost forgot about my duffel bag due to all the hectic events that had taken place. As I got out of the car to retrieve it, I looked up the hill into the shrubbery. As I stared up that hill, I swear that I saw that crooked smile through the greenery staring down back at me. After I made it home that night, I called my parents up and I pleaded for them to come home, simply telling them that I was chased by a man who was attempting to rob me. I knew they wouldn't believe my story about the creature that I saw. Shortly after the return, the cops came as well. They asked for a description of the individual who had chased me. Not wanting to go into detail about the horrifying proportions of that thing, I just told them that it was too dark to make out any distinguishing features. Apparently, they also interviewed the man who had saved me, and he told them that I was running from nothing. Just complete darkness. His testimony was among one of the reasons my parents coached me into therapy. That, along with the fact that I wasn't near the same person I was before my parents left for their vacation. Eventually, everything went back to a somewhat normal state, despite my traumatic experience. Needless to say, I never left my house past midnight again, unless of course I was in a car. Even in a group of friends, I still declined going out without a solid means of transportation. The events of that night have always stuck with me. It's been years, and late at night, I still hear those sickening bone pops and those inhuman screams right as I'm trying to get some shut-eye. I've moved around quite a bit since then, trying to get to larger cities, just to avoid the unnerving empty stretches, as well as the dim lighting that my old hometown used to provide. No matter how far I move from where it had happened, I can't seem to shake what had occurred on that dark night over Thanksgiving break. No amount of medications, therapy sessions, or research into what the hell that thing was has helped me cope with the trauma of it all. It's almost as if now that I know creatures like that exist, reality seems like a stranger to me. How little we as humans seem to know about our little crevice of this universe terrifies me. I constantly wonder what else there is that we simply lack the means to perceive. All of this brings me to the main point of writing and sharing this with all of you. Consider this a sort of warning for those of you who are night owls. Things are not what they seem when it's dark out. Please, be safe, Share this with those that you care about. And most of all, be wary of the creatures that come out past midnight.